Star Fox. It's a rail-line flight sim shooter in which you fight against the armies of the evil Emperor Andros and defend the galaxy. Right? We all remember doing that, right? Wrong. Well, mostly. In fact, the only Star Fox game that fits that description is the very, very first one. By the time we were once again exposed to Star Fox, it had already developed into something so much more than that. Free 3D flight, ground missions, underwater missions, they were all there by the second entry. In fact, if the description I gave fits your definition of Star Fox, then I can only assume that you've only played the very first one. So why, in a franchise that has 7, soon to be 8, entries, do we still define what that franchise is based on its very first entry? You see what I'm getting at? No? Alright, let me give you an example. If I show you Mario Kart and say, look, it's a Mario game, you'd say, oh, cool, Mario. But if I hand you Star Fox Adventures and say, look, a Star Fox game, many of you would respond with, psh, that one doesn't count. Now, you might say that Mario Kart is a spin-off of the Mario franchise, thus our willingness to accept its differences from other Mario games. Fair enough, I say, but what about Mario 64? The first Mario was a game about running from point A to point B in a set amount of time in a 2D environment. Mario 64 is a game about exploring a vast open world to find stars in a 3D environment. What do those two games have in common? A few characters. Now, Star Fox on the Super Nintendo is a game about flying along a set path to get to an end goal. Star Fox Adventures is a game about exploring a vast open world to find and collect, well, pretty much everything. What do these games have in common? A few characters. So why is it that Mario 64 is held as one of the greatest games in history, and Star Fox Adventures is the black sheep of the Star Fox franchise? I mean, it's not like Star Fox Adventures was bad, it sits at a comfortable 82 on Metacritic, we reviewed it twice on NintendoWorldReport.com, and both reviewers felt it deserved an 8 out of 10. That's pretty good. So what's the difference? Why is it that Mario can exist transdimensionally, but as soon as Fox McCloud sets one robotic limb outside of his R-Wing, we go crazy? Is Star Fox a rail-line flight sim shooter, or are we maybe playing this series wrong? Let's start at the beginning. Star Fox on the Super Nintendo began its life as an evolution of 2 other games. In the late 80s and early 90s, Argonaut Software was a pioneering entity in the realm of 3D graphics and video games, particularly on home consoles. In 1992, they collaborated with Nintendo to release X, a Japanese-only 3D tank simulator for the Game Boy. The game featured vector-style 3D graphics. The player controlled a tank that could travel the surface of a planet and even take off and fly. The game also featured a few rail-line tunnel flight segments which played similarly to Star Fox. While the game was never officially released in America, it is a very inexpensive game to import, and since the Game Boy isn't region-locked, it's easy to play regardless of where you live. Coming off of the successful release of X, Argonaut developed a 3D prototype for the NES. The game was called NES Glider, and was based on their previous title, Star Glider, which they had released for the Atari ST and Amiga. While work on this prototype began on the NES, within a few weeks Argonaut had also managed to develop a version for the then prototyped SNES. Nintendo was of course impressed, and were more than happy to give Argonaut the go-ahead to develop additional hardware for the Super Nintendo, in order to expand its 3D capabilities. This hardware would be the Super Effects chip, and Argonaut's NES Glider would become the very first Star Fox. Why am I telling you all of this? What does any of this have to do with Star Fox's genre? Well, by looking at these games, we can see what Argonaut had in mind for the original Star Fox. X, Star Glider, even NES Glider were all free-roaming 3D experiences, whereas Star Fox, as it exists on the Super Nintendo, is a rail-line experience. Why? I would propose that Argonaut, along with Miyamoto, Iguchi, and Yamada, opted for a limited range of motion to allow for a greater draw distance and improved overall performance. Just look at Argonaut's previous polygonal 3D flight game, Star Glider 2. The game's taxing polygonal graphics meant that the draw distance was extremely short. Now compare that to Star Fox, which featured enemies and structures looming in the distance. The reasons for their choice is clear. The Super Nintendo was brand new, and the FX chip was brand new. They chose to make a slightly more confined game, and it paid off. That desire to allow players to explore a larger, open, 3D environment is also supported by the cancelled Star Fox 2. Thanks to the experience Argonaut had gained working on the first Star Fox, they now had the technical expertise to allow the player to explore freely in 3D. Not only that, but they could transform into a walker and explore the surface of planets, dive underwater, and even delve into fully 3D Zelda-esque dungeon environments. All of these things that we associate with bad Star Fox games are sitting right here in front of us on a Super Nintendo game developed by the original creators of Star Fox. But of course you say that they cancelled Star Fox 2 and instead released Star Fox 64, which once again returned to what many view as traditional Star Fox. Now, once again, I have no proof of the theory I'm about to put forward, but I don't think it's too far-fetched. Like the original Star Fox, the developers were working on a new system. Limiting most missions to a rail line allowed them to keep a smooth frame rate and a comfortable draw distance. All-range mode, one of the few surviving concepts from Star Fox 2, was restricted to closed-off, flat, square environments so that the entire battlefield could be rendered at once. Ground exploration was also carried over, though like the R-Wing levels, they too were restricted to a rail line. Had Star Fox 2 been released as its creators had intended, we'd likely think of Star Fox today as a game about using vehicles to freely explore 3D environments and shoot stuff. But because that middle entry was cut out, we found ourselves with two games that both focus, likely due to hardware limitations, on a rail line experience. But that's not where the story ends. In fact, it just gets more interesting. It's easy to see why the public would see the next entry in the Star Fox series, Star Fox Adventures, as a huge misstep, given the Star Fox games they'd seen up to that point. We, however, have the advantage of seeing what Star Fox almost accomplished in Star Fox 2. Given the Zelda-style 3D dungeons of Star Fox 2, is it really that strange to think of an entire Star Fox game built around that concept? Now, of course, we all know that Star Fox Adventures wasn't originally a Star Fox game at all. Developer Rare began work on the game as a title for the N64 disk drive. The game starred two entirely original characters who just so happened to be foxes. The game combined traditional Zelda elements with Rare's signature collectathon gameplay. However, with the failure of the disk drive, development was understandably stalled, and the game would eventually resurface as Star Fox Adventures for the GameCube. But what happened to Rare's original characters? Nintendo felt that the game would have more leverage and selling power if they were to put an established character in the lead. Conveniently, Nintendo had Fox McCloud sitting ready for his GameCube debut. Despite generally positive reviews, incredible graphics, and a great soundtrack, fans were disappointed that Star Fox Adventures wasn't like the other two Star Fox games. And to be fair, even if Star Fox 2 had been released, Adventures would likely still feel like a bit of an outlier. But its link back to the series would be much easier to track, and perhaps it would not be looked upon with the disregard that so many fans have for it today. Now, before we go on to the next Star Fox game, and before we finish with Adventures, I think it's important to highlight one other element that helps make a Star Fox game a Star Fox game. During an interview for Nintendo's 2015 E3 presentation, Shigeru Miyamoto stated, "There was a TV show about fighter planes called Thunderbirds. That inspired me to make a game that had cinematic elements, with each character having their own distinct personality and their own drama." Right from the beginning of the franchise, Miyamoto viewed story and character development as a key part of the series. With this as one of his primary motivations, the series gained a reputation for its memorable characters and quotable dialogue.
Don't hesitate. When the time comes, just act.
Hey, Einstein, I'm on your side!
And now, to destroy the Lylat system!
Do a barrel roll!
It's no wonder why Miyamoto would have felt that Fox McCloud could hold his own in a more story-heavy adventure game. In fact, the idea of over-the-top character drama is a theme that stuck with the series much more so than any particular genre. Star Fox Assault was a step back in the direction of what many consider traditional Star Fox gameplay, and in my opinion, it's a fantastic game that way too few people have actually played all the way through. It combines the R-Wing levels of Star Fox and Star Fox 64 with the ground exploration of Star Fox 2, and even lets you exit your ship entirely as a nod to Star Fox Adventures. On top of that, the story is the most over-the-top, melodramatically perfect story to ever grace a Star Fox game.
Let us live as one.
Fox, don't let it fool you. You know your father is...
I know! My father would never tell me to give up!
Once again, many people took issue with the ground levels in Star Fox Assault, and once again, the absence of Star Fox 2 led gamers to see this ground combat as something that was forced in to allude to Star Fox Adventures, rather than being an incredible reworking of the ground combat from Star Fox 2. You starting to catch on to how much introducing Star Fox 2 into the timeline just changes the way we look at this series? It's fascinating to see how much we base what we think a game ought to be on some predefined template that we praise as the word of the Krazoa. But the problem is we don't actually have the entire template. I think it was around this time that Nintendo realized this was a problem. So, all these years later, would they finally release Star Fox 2 and set the record straight? No, but their plan wasn't all that bad. With Argonaut long gone, Nintendo would have to turn to a new development team, one that had risen from the ashes of Argonaut and that had deep ties to Star Fox 2. Q Games was tasked with developing the first portable entry in the Star Fox series, and as a template, Nintendo gave them not Star Fox or even Star Fox 64, but rather Star Fox 2. The team was given a copy of the finished Star Fox 2. Now, just to be clear, this isn't the partial, fan-completed version that's been floating around the internet for years. No, this is the complete, totally done, absolutely finished version that Nintendo could release whenever they want, but they don't. That version. It was a fascinating idea. Bring the long-lost Star Fox 2 into the modern era and finally reintroduce all those ideas that had inspired later Star Fox games back into the franchise where they had always belonged. There was a lot about Star Fox Command that worked. The tactical combat of Star Fox 2, the epic branching paths of Star Fox 64, and a melodramatic plot truly worthy of the Star Fox universe. Unfortunately, each of these things also highlights the game's core issue. It's an amalgamation of a bunch of different ideas from different developers over the years, rather than the clear gameplay mechanics of its source material, Star Fox 2. Gone is the transforming vehicle, gone are the ground-based missions, gone is the exploration. It's as if the developers, or perhaps Nintendo themselves, were afraid to commit to the Star Fox 2 design and Star Fox Command. Because of this confusing pile of game design, Star Fox Command would largely be forgotten. It's a shame because it's not at all a bad game, just one that might require a little bit more dedication to fully understand and enjoy. So here we sit. Star Fox Zero looms on the horizon, promising to revitalize the Star Fox series. The question I have is, into what? What does Nintendo think a Star Fox game is? What do you think a Star Fox game is? Are those two definitions the same? Essentially, Nintendo has the full Star Fox lineup, and we're missing the second piece. However, there is one thing of which I've grown absolutely confident. Star Fox, as a franchise, is not a rail-line flight sim shooter. If we break down playtime of each game into what exactly the player is doing, we can see that this is true. Were you to play through the entire officially released Star Fox series, you'd spend an average of 11 hours in your R-Wing. You'd spend 23 hours on ground, either on foot or in a Landmaster. And the rest of your time would be spent in menus or watching cutscenes. Most of that time, regardless of vehicle, you would be openly exploring 3D environments and not on a rail line. You would, however, always be fighting the Save the Galaxy from Andross or some other evil force. You would always be following the overly dramatic tale of Fox McCloud and his band of mercenaries for hire, Star Fox. Star Fox, as a franchise, is a series about journeying through space and exploring distant worlds, along with a band of anthropomorphic mercenaries. Its genre is virtually impossible to define, but is perhaps best encompassed by a game that was never actually released. In other words, Nintendo, give us Star Fox 2. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to properly distribute your thumbs below. Is that the right hand? Okay, this one. Preferably the upward pointing ones, but I mean, it's, you know, you do you. And if you like Star Fox half as much as I do, you might want to check out my full Let's Play series of every single Star Fox game leading up to the release of Star Fox Zero, at which point I'll also be playing that one. You can check out a full playlist of all of those videos right there. And also, please subscribe to Nintendo World Report TV so that we can continue to spread our love of all things Nintendo. There's a link for that right here, under, like there's that button, and then there's this button. And you should also check out NintendoWorldReport.com for tons of other Nintendo coverage. And I will see you guys next time. Bye. Oh, I should wave with the other hand because it's under the thing. It's too late now. It's too late. The moment is past, and now it's weird, and we just have to deal with it.